They set him up. They thought they could use the same tired tricks, interrupt, mock, twist his words, and make him look out of touch. They thought Clint Eastwood would fumble, get defensive, maybe even lash out. But they forgot one thing. Clint Eastwood isn't just another celebrity. He's a legend. The moment the interview began, the trap was obvious. The smug TV host, the hand-picked audience trained to laugh at all the right moments, the leading questions designed to make him look like the bad guy. It was all scripted. But Clint, he doesn't follow scripts. So when the host pushed too far, when they made the biggest mistake of their career, Clint didn't just push back, he destroyed them. And when the dust settled, the network was in full-blown crisis mode. Because this wasn't just another viral moment. This was a reckoning. And Clint Eastwood, he walked away more powerful than ever. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's get started. The studio was buzzing with anticipation. The producers knew what was coming. The audience had been carefully selected, a mix of social media influencers, progressive activists, and audience members prepped to react on cue. And at the center of it all, Clint Eastwood, the guest they had been waiting for. The host, a smug, calculated opponent. Across from Clint sat Elliot Parker, a TV host known for his ability to trap conservative guests. His specialty? Twisting words, cutting off responses, and turning interviews into performances. He had done it before, turned politicians into jokes, made actors stumble, and forced CEOs into awkward viral moments. And tonight, he was convinced Clint Eastwood would be his next victim. But he had no idea what he was up against. The pre-planned attack, a setup from the start. Behind the scenes, emails had already circulated among the producers. Keep interrupting him. Make him look like he's stuck in the past. Use audience reactions to drown him out. The goal? To frame Clint Eastwood as outdated, rigid, and out of touch. Elliot's producers had prepped talking points designed to push Clint into a corner. Hollywood doesn't need tough guys anymore. Men like you represent an era that's fading. Don't you think your brand of masculinity is toxic? It wasn't a real discussion. It was a scripted takedown. And Clint, he knew it. The second he walked onto that stage. The moment before it all began. The cameras rolled. Elliot Parker flashed his signature smirk. "Mr. Eastwood," he began, "let's be honest. Your movies glorify a version of masculinity that in today's world is, well, let's just say, outdated." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Elliot leaned in, tilting his head slightly. The trap was set. But Clint Eastwood, he didn't flinch. He didn't stammer. He didn't blink. Instead, he smiled. Because Elliot Parker had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The second Clint Eastwood opened his mouth to respond, Elliot Parker struck. "Now hold on, Clint." Elliot interrupted before Clint could even finish his first sentence, flashing his practiced smirk. "Let's be real. Tough guys like you had their time. But don't you think we've moved past the era of men solving problems with their fists?" A few scattered chuckles rippled through the audience. Right on cue. Elliot's producers had prepped the crowd. They weren't just there to watch. They were part of the act. The scripted takedown begins. Clint leaned back, completely unbothered. He had faced real challenges in life. Hollywood scandals, political attacks, even war. A smug TV host? Not exactly a threat. "Well," Clint started, voice calm, measured. Elliot cut him off again. "Because let's be honest," he pressed, Guys like you built your careers on playing these hyper-masculine, no-nonsense tough guys, right? A few audience members snickered. Elliot chuckled along with them, feeding off their energy. I mean, you can admit it, Clint. You're the guy who made people believe that being a real man means never showing emotions, never backing down, and always winning through violence. More laughter, more nods from the audience. It was working. Or so Elliot thought. The audience as a weapon. Clint opened his mouth again, but Elliot wasn't about to let him get a full sentence out. That's what I'm saying, though, Elliot said, raising a hand as if he was graciously giving Clint time to think. Don't you think we need a new kind of hero? One that doesn't rely on old-school masculinity? Another planted laugh from the audience. A camera zoomed in on Clint's expression. They were waiting for a reaction. Waiting for him to get flustered, defensive, maybe even angry. Because the second Clint showed weakness, they would edit that into a viral moment. But Clint, he wasn't playing along. The host turns up the heat, hoping for a meltdown. Elliot leaned forward. His voice got softer. His signature, "I'm about to ruin you" move. "Let me ask you something, Clint," he said, locking eyes with him. A hush fell over the audience. The perfect setup for a knockout blow. If you were starting your career today, do you honestly think someone like you would still be successful? I mean, let's face it, your kind of masculinity, it just doesn't sell anymore. The audience laughed. The cameras zoomed in. The trap was fully set. All Clint had to do now was fall into it. Clint Eastwood's reaction shifts the energy. For the first time in the entire interview, Clint moved, slowly, deliberately. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and gave Elliot a look. Not angry, not defensive, just patient. The kind of patience that comes from knowing you've already won. Then he spoke, and everything changed. Clint turns the tables. The energy in the room shifts. You ever seen a firefighter run out of a burning building because he needed to process his emotions? Silence. The audience stopped laughing. Elliot blinked. Clint's voice didn't change. You ever see a soldier in combat drop his weapon to have a moment of vulnerability? Elliot opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Clint sat back. Because last time I checked, the world doesn't run on feelings. It runs on people who show up when it matters. People who take the hit and keep moving forward. A single clap came from the audience, then another. Elliot's grip on his cue cards tightened. This was not how it was supposed to go. The host's desperation, trying to regain control. Elliot forced a chuckle. He needed to get Clint back on the defensive. Fast. "Okay, Clint," he said, voice sharper now, "but don't you think your movies, your entire career, have glorified outdated ideas? The lone wolf, the man who solves everything with his fists? Isn't that part of the problem?" Clint smirked. "Tell me something," he said. "You ever see a movie where the hero saves the world by filling out paperwork?" Laughter. Real laughter. Not just from the audience, but from the crew. Even some of Elliot's own staff members were grinning. Elliot's face turned red. He had to regain control. Elliot's fatal mistake. The moment he lost everything, he leaned in, voice almost desperate now. "Clint, let's be real," he said, trying to sound calm. "Men like you, old school, hyper-masculine, unwilling to change, you're part of the reason society is so divided today. Don't you think it's time for your kind of thinking to just fade away?" Gasps. Even the producers backstage froze. That was a mistake. Clint's expression didn't change. But his next words ended Elliot Parker's career. Clint Eastwood drops the final hammer. He exhaled slowly. You ever see a building being demolished? Elliot frowned. What does that have to do with... Takes a few seconds, doesn't it? Clint continued. Push a button, set off some charges, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Elliot blinked. I don't see how that's... But you ever watch one being built? Silence. The audience leaned in. Clint nodded. That takes years. Brick by brick, steel by steel. Men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it's strong enough to hold. He tilted his head. The people with the detonators don't care about that. They don't think about the effort, the work, the sweat. They just want to see it fall. The audience went wild. Even some of the show's crew members clapped. Elliot froze. He had lost them. Completely. The internet reacts. Clint just ended the debate. Before the interview even ended, clips were already flooding social media. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in the most savage way possible. The moment Elliot Parker realized he lost. This is why legends never die. And Elliot, he could feel it. The trap he had set for Clint had snapped shut on him instead. He glanced at the producers off stage. Their faces were pale, because they all knew one thing. This wasn't just an awkward interview. This was a career-ending disaster. The second Clint Eastwood finished speaking, the atmosphere in the studio changed. The controlled, scripted spectacle that the producers had planned, gone. The smug confidence on Elliot Parker's face shattered. And the audience, they were no longer playing along. They were listening. The audience starts turning. Clint gains control. For the first time since the interview started, Elliot Parker wasn't leading the conversation. Clint had flipped the script. Instead of reacting, instead of getting defensive, he had forced Elliot to explain himself. And Elliot? He had nothing. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but they weren't mocking Clint anymore. They were waiting to see what he'd say next. And Elliot? He felt it. His control over the narrative was slipping. He needed to act fast. The host tries to regain power. But Clint flips the script. Elliot forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. Okay, he said, shifting in his chair. So you think toughness still has a place in today's world? That men like you, old school, hard-nosed, never back down, are what society needs? Clint didn't hesitate. I think the world is a tough place, he said, voice steady. And people who don't know how to stand their ground usually get run over. Applause. Not just a few claps this time. A real growing wave of approval. Elliot's jaw tightened. This was not supposed to happen. So he did what every cornered host does when they're losing an argument. He went personal. Elliot's fatal mistake. The moment he lost everything. Elliot leaned in, lowering his voice, making it sound like he was about to reveal some big dark truth. But Clint, he said, shaking his head, let's be honest, you're not exactly known for emotional depth. A lot of people would say that men like you, this tough guy act, is part of what's dividing the country. The audience gasped. Elliot's voice grew sharper. And let's not forget, you're not perfect. You've had your fair share of controversies. Maybe it's time for people like you to just step aside. Dead silence. The air felt different now. The audience wasn't laughing. Even Elliot's own producers looked concerned. Because that was a step too far. Clint's response. That shattered the interview. Clint didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact. He just smirked. A slow, knowing smirk. like a man who had just watched his opponent knock himself out. Then he spoke. You ever see a mother work 3 jobs to feed her kids? Elliot blinked. What? Clint leaned forward. A mother. You ever see one work 2, 3 jobs just to put food on the table, to keep a roof over her kids' heads? Elliot hesitated. Well, that's toughness, Clint said. You ever see a firefighter run into a burning building when everyone else is running out? Elliot shifted in his seat. You ever see a soldier in combat, a cop on the street, a factory worker pulling double shifts to keep the lights on? Clint let the words sink in. Then he sat back. And you're telling me toughness is the problem? The audience erupted. Applause, cheering. Even some of Elliot's crew members were nodding. Elliot? His face turned pale. Because he had lost them. Completely. The internet reacts. Clint just ended the debate. Before the interview even ended, clips were already flooding social media. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in the most savage way possible. The moment Elliot Parker realized he lost, this is why legends never die. And Elliot, he could feel it. The trap he had set for Clint had snapped shut on him instead. He glanced at the producers off stage. Their faces were pale because they all knew one thing. This wasn't just an awkward interview. This was a career-ending disaster. The network goes into full-blown panic mode. Inside the network's headquarters, chaos had turned into full-blown collapse. Ratings were crashing, sponsors were reconsidering their contracts. Even other journalists were turning against Elliot. Then came the worst possible news. Major sponsor pulls support from network after controversial interview. Boom. Millions lost overnight. The network tried to put out a statement. We value all perspectives and regret that tensions ran high during this interview. Nobody bought it. Because by now, Elliot Parker's reputation was in ruins. His show was hemorrhaging sponsors. The network was facing real consequences. They had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Because now, Clint Eastwood was preparing a lawsuit. Clint walks away untouched and stronger than ever. A few days later, a reporter caught up with Clint at a public event. Mr. Eastwood, what do you think about everything that happened? Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, They did it to themselves. Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just summed up the entire case in 4 words. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the legal battle was just beginning. They thought they could control the narrative. They thought they could twist the footage, edit the clips, and make Clint Eastwood look like the bad guy. Instead, they created the most viral moment of the year. Within minutes of the interview ending, the internet exploded. Social media goes nuclear, where Eastwood destroys trends. Worldwide, it started with one clip. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in the most savage way possible. Then another. The exact moment Elliot Parker realized he lost. And before the network even had time to react, Eastwood destroys. Cancel Elliot Parker. Media manipulation, all trending at #1 worldwide. Millions of views. Hundreds of thousands of comments. And the response, absolutely brutal. She set the trap. She fell into it. I have no sympathy. Clint didn't even raise his voice. That's how you know he won. Notice how he let her talk, but she kept interrupting? Yeah, we see through it now. Even people who didn't normally support Clint were admitting the truth. I don't usually agree with Eastwood, but this was pure class. This is exactly why people don't trust the media anymore. And the worst part, for Elliot Parker, even her own supporters were turning against her. Sponsors start pulling out. We can't be associated with this. Inside the network's headquarters, panic mode was in full effect. They knew the backlash was bad, but they had no idea how bad. Then, the first major sponsor pulled out. We do not wish to be associated with a program that engages in deceptive and biased journalism. Effective immediately, we are ending our sponsorship. Boom. Millions gone overnight, and once one sponsor jumped ship, the rest followed. By noon, 3 more major advertisers had backed out. By the next morning, nearly half of the show's sponsors were gone. Network executives were scrambling to stop the financial bleeding. They issued a carefully worded statement. We value open and honest discussions. While tensions ran high during the interview, we regret any misinterpretations and remain committed to journalistic integrity. Translation: please, sponsors, don't leave us. But it was too late. The show had lost credibility, and the network knew it. Elliot Parker tries to defend herself. It backfires instantly. Desperate to save herself, Elliot went on Twitter. She posted a long, dramatic thread. The way people are attacking me over this interview is disgusting. This is exactly why media figures are afraid to challenge outdated ideas, because of toxic online mobs. Big mistake. The replies? Brutal. Oh, now you want to talk about toxic mobs after spending years trying to cancel others? You played stupid games, now you're winning stupid prizes. Elliot, just take the L. You got humbled on live TV. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A clip leaked from before the interview. Hot mic footage from the production team. Elliot could be heard laughing with producers, saying, "We just need to push him until he snaps. The audience will eat it up." Boom! This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Celebrities and politicians joined the conversation. The scandal was too big to ignore. Hollywood began taking sides. Famous actors, directors, and public figures started weighing in. Clint Eastwood just reminded everyone why he's a legend. Famous actor tweet, "Elliot Parker played herself, end of story." Popular political commentator, "This is why people don't trust the media anymore." Former TV host, even some liberal figures admitted Elliot had gone too far. I don't always agree with Clint, but yeah, this was a bad look for the press. Cutting off guests, twisting words. This is exactly why journalism is dying. And then came the worst blow. A US senator tweeted, "What happened to Clint Eastwood is exactly why people don't trust the media. This was an ambush, not an interview." A sitting senator just called out the media. Oh, this is bad. Elliot wasn't just losing credibility in Hollywood, she was losing credibility at the national level. The network tries to save face. But it's too late. Inside the network headquarters, executives were scrambling, emergency PR teams were deployed. Producers were ordered to find old clips of Clint Eastwood being problematic to shift the narrative. Legal teams were preparing for potential lawsuits. Then came the official network statement. "We acknowledge that tensions ran high during the interview. While we value diverse perspectives, we regret how the conversation unfolded and will be reviewing our interview practices moving forward." Too late. The internet wasn't buying it. Because by now, Elliot Parker's reputation was in ruins, Her show was hemorrhaging sponsors. The network was facing real consequences. They had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Because now, Clint Eastwood was preparing a lawsuit. Clint Eastwood speaks out. The final blow. For days, Clint had stayed silent. He didn't need to post online. He didn't need a PR team. He didn't need to play the victim because he had already won. But when reporters finally caught up with him, he gave them just 3 words. They did it themselves. Mic drop. The clip, instantly viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 3 words. He didn't just win. He changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the legal battle was just beginning. The fallout from the disastrous interview had already destroyed Elliot Parker's reputation. Her show was collapsing, sponsors were fleeing, and the network was scrambling to contain the damage. But what came next? No one saw it coming, because Clint Eastwood wasn't done yet. Now, he was taking them to court. Clint Eastwood files a lawsuit. This was a coordinated smear. 3 days after the interview, headlines exploded across every major news outlet. Clint Eastwood files multi-million-dollar lawsuit against network for defamation and media manipulation. This wasn't just about one bad interview. Clint's legal team made it very clear. The interview was a premeditated ambush. Producers manipulated audience reactions to make Clint look bad. Elliot Parker was instructed to push Clint until he either snapped or could be edited to look unhinged. Leaked hot mic footage proved the show intended to trap him from the start. And the biggest accusation? Defamation with intent to harm his career and reputation. Clint wasn't just suing for himself. He was making an example out of them. And the network, they were panicking. Leaked emails and footage exposed the truth. As if the lawsuit wasn't bad enough, the internet wasn't done exposing them. A former producer, a whistleblower who had worked behind the scenes on Elliot's show, came forward. And what they revealed? Absolute corruption. They leaked internal emails that proved everything Clint was saying. Producers were instructed to make sure Clint stumbles. Audience members were pre-selected based on their willingness to react negatively to Clint. Elliot was given pre-written talking points designed to bait Clint into an argument. And then, the worst one. An email from a senior executive to Elliot Parker and her producers before the interview. Do whatever you need to. We need a viral moment. Make him look bad. Boom. This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Public outrage. They lied to everyone. The leaked emails spread like wildfire. Exposed. Network planned to sabotage Clint Eastwood before interview even started. This wasn't journalism. It was a smear campaign. They tried to destroy Clint, but they destroyed themselves instead. The backlash. Unstoppable. Viewers were furious. Hollywood figures started speaking out. More former employees of the network began sharing their own horror stories. Comment sections were brutal. So they admit they lied to the audience, and we're supposed to trust them again. If they did this to Clint, how many others have they done it to? This is the moment the media lost all credibility. The network had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. The network faces massive consequences. Advertisers are leaving. Inside the network's headquarters, chaos had turned into full-blown collapse. Their credibility was in ruins. Major advertisers were cutting ties. Stock prices were plummeting. Then came the final blow. Breaking. Major news. network. Fined for manipulating interviews and spreading false narratives. A $20 million fine. Publicly exposed for deception. Their credibility? Gone. And the final humiliation? They were forced to issue a public apology to Clint Eastwood. We regret how the interview with Mr. Eastwood was handled. Our network is committed to journalistic integrity and will be implementing new policies to ensure fair treatment of all guests moving forward. Nobody believed them, but they had no choice. They weren't in control anymore. The public was. Elliot Parker disappears. Nobody wants to work with her. Elliot Parker had once been the queen of viral interviews. Now, she was radioactive. Her show had been shut down. Her network had cut ties, and no other station wanted to touch her. Desperate for sympathy, she went on a podcast and tried to play the victim. The way people are attacking me is just proof of how toxic our culture has become. It backfired instantly. Wait, weren't you the one attacking Clint? Elliot, you made a career out of canceling others. Now it's your turn. Funny how the people who love cancel culture suddenly hate it when it happens to them. By the end of the month, Elliot deleted her social media, announced she was taking a break from public life, disappeared completely. And just like that, her career was over. The network tries to settle the lawsuit. Clint refuses to back down. After weeks of legal battles, the network tried to settle. They knew they couldn't win. The final terms, a multi-million-dollar payout to Clint Eastwood, a full public apology from the network, a commitment to review and revise their interview practices. And the biggest consequence? Clint's lawsuit had set a precedent. From now on, networks couldn't get away with manipulating interviews. They knew if they tried, they could get sued into the ground. Everything had changed. Clint Eastwood's final words. They did it to themselves. A week after the case was settled, reporters finally caught up with Clint. Mr. Eastwood, what do you have to say about everything that happened? Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, they did it to themselves. Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just summed up the entire case in 4 words. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the message would never be forgotten, because now the media knew that the American people weren't falling for their tricks anymore. Elliot Parker's career was over. The network had spent weeks trying to contain the damage. They tried statements, they tried damage control, they even tried to spin the narrative, but nothing worked. Because the truth, it was already out. The show gets cancelled. No one trusts them anymore. For years, the Elliot Parker Show had been a top-rated program. Now, it was radioactive. Ratings had dropped by 70%. Viewers were tuning out. Every new episode was flooded with dislikes and angry comments. The network had hoped that the scandal would fade. Instead, it kept getting worse. Then one morning, the inevitable happened. Breaking. The Elliot Parker Show, officially cancelled after historic backlash. Just like that, the show was dead, and Elliot Parker, she was next. Elliot Parker's career is over. Nobody will hire her. Elliot had spent years building a career on viral takedowns. She had ambushed countless guests. She had twisted narratives to fit her agenda. She had built a brand on manipulation. Now, it had all backfired. No network would touch her. No sponsors wanted to be associated with her. Even her own colleagues were distancing themselves. She tried to fight back. She went on a podcast, claiming she had been unfairly targeted. The way people are attacking me is just proof of how toxic our culture has become. It backfired instantly. Wait, weren't you the one attacking Clint? Elliot, you spent years canceling people. Now it's your turn. Funny how the people who love cancel culture suddenly hate it when it happens to them. By the end of the month, Elliot deleted her social media, announced she was taking a break from public life, disappeared completely, and just like that, her career was over. The network pays the price, fined for media manipulation. But it wasn't just Elliot who suffered. The entire network was now under fire. Regulators were investigating their interview tactics. More whistleblowers were coming forward. Lawsuits were piling up. Then came the final blow. A major news network fined $20 million for deceptive journalism practices. They were forced to pay massive penalties for manipulating interviews and misleading the public. And the biggest humiliation? They were required to issue a public apology to Clint Eastwood. We regret how the interview with Mr. Eastwood was conducted. Our network is committed to journalistic integrity and will be making internal changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Nobody bought it. Because the damage was already done, the media had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the public had taken that power back. Clint Eastwood, stronger than ever. And Clint, he didn't just survive, he thrived. His movies saw a massive resurgence in popularity. His interviews were getting millions of views. Fans, new and old, rallied behind him. Because in the age of media manipulation, Clint represented something rare: authenticity, grit. A man who stood his ground, no matter the cost. At an event weeks later, a reporter asked him about the scandal. "Mr. Eastwood, what do you think about everything that's happened?" Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, "They did it to themselves." Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 4 words. This is why legends never die. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. And just like that, the story was over, but the message would never be forgotten. Final message. The truth always wins. The media wanted to silence him. They wanted to humiliate him. Instead, they exposed themselves. They lost their credibility. They lost their audience. And they lost the trust of the people. Because in the end, the truth always wins. Call to action. Share this video. If you care about the truth, free speech, and holding the media accountable, share this video. Because the media wanted you to forget what happened. Don't let them. The end.